This generation Yamaha R1 has been my dream bike since my dad got one 6 years ago. So when I found this one going cheap because it's an X-Track bike, I decided to buy it. And now I'm going to turn it back into a street bike. But I would be stupid not to take it to the racetrack before I do that. Because it's not every day that I have a track-ready R1 sitting in my workshop. Plus, it'll give me a chance to properly ride it for the first time, because there's only so much you can learn when trying to get a quick illegal ride in on the street. And then I can strip off all of these track fairings and take stock of all the parts I need to make it a street bike once again. But before I take it to the track, we need to sort 3 things out. First, we need to get the fancy HM quickshifter and auto blipper working. I need to change the oil so I know it's fresh, and it also needs new tires. Can you tell I miss having a kickstand? I started with the tires. Well, that meant that I actually had to start by removing the safety wiring from the front caliper bolts. Not something I've ever had to do, which made it fun. These tires aren't completely worn out, but I will need new ones before it's a street bike, so why not do it now? Not to mention, these are mismatched. The front is a Michelin and the rear is a Bridgestone. I tried to go down the middle with Bridgestone S22s. They should be decent on the street and the track, and luckily it doesn't rain often where I live. And just like that, it was already looking better, so I moved on to the quirky quickshifter. I had a suspicion that the quickshifter could just be set up upside down, because it feels like it's trying to blip the throttle when I upshift instead of downshift. At first, I thought I was just going crazy and accidentally bumping the throttle every time I was upshifting. But then the previous owner told me that this is a brand new quickshifter that was replaced under warranty, and he hasn't ridden with it since. So it could have just been installed in a hurry. So if it's set up for regular shifting and the bike is in GP shift, obviously it won't work. At first, I was going to try to download the software and plug into its USB port, but the HM website was down, so I couldn't even download the software. How useful. So I went down the easier route instead. I simply flipped the gear linkage around. Which I later learned is the wrong way to do this. That is the old school method. On these bikes, you're supposed to move the shaft on the gear lever from one side of the pivot to the other, so that now when you upshift, for example, it has the opposite effect on the quickshifter strain gauge. My method will still work, but it's not how it was intended. So I went to test if the quickshifter would work now, only to discover that my battery was dead once again. I really need a new one, but in the meantime, I put it back on charge. I didn't manage to film it, but I got the bike running, took it up and down the road a few times, and magically the quickshifter and blipper now work. I didn't need any fancy software or clever people. It was a super simple fix, and I'm happy that I got it working before my track day, because it would suck to have a fancy quickshifter that doesn't work when you need it most. The next day I treated it to a new battery and let it warm itself up a bit so I could change the oil. And I figured it was warm enough by accidentally touching the headers. It's refreshing to have a drain bolt in such a good spot, and the oil looked pretty good. It was still a tad red, which means it was as fresh as the previous owner promised. I also got to play with more safety wiring on the oil filter as well as on the filler cap, and was happy to see a nut on the filter for easy removal. I just wish it didn't have to pour all over the headers. I guess it wouldn't do that on a kickstand. So with a new genuine Yamaha filter and more than an entire bottle of oil, I finally got to add my own race number, because after all, I'm not going to the track to mess around. I'm going for the lap record. This is Red Star Raceway, and Wednesdays tend to be overcrowded here, but luckily I managed to find some space in the pits. I looked ridiculous with my cheapo leathers, track R1 and zero talent, but that wasn't going to stop me having fun. I was also the only guy in C-Class, which meant I had the entire track to myself, just how I like it. The problem with this track is that they're one of those that don't let you mount cameras to your helmet. So I put it in my helmet instead. A nice loophole in the rules, I think. And this isn't even sponsored, but how cool is the Insta360 Go 3 for times like this? The first session was terrible. I mean, I still had tons of fun, but it was plagued with bike problems. Remember how I'd flipped my gear linkage around? Well, now that I was wearing boots, I could barely get my foot under the lever to upshift. And even when I did manage to shift, it wasn't changing gears. The quick shifter was killing the ignition, but it wasn't changing gears. And that was the least of my worries. It was also doing this when accelerating. And that's not my hand. My hand was steady. It's the bike cutting out for some reason. After that session, I changed the position of the lever to where I wanted it, and my problems went away. I later learned that quick shifters like to be at a 90-degree angle here, and I was obviously miles away from that. So as soon as I fixed that, the problem went away. The second session was more fun now that I could change gear whenever I wanted, and the bike sounded phenomenal. But it was still cutting out every now and then higher up in the revs, so I was short shifting in the hopes it wouldn't do it mid-corner, where it proved to be a little dangerous. As the day went on, it cut out less and less until the final 2 sessions when it didn't do it at all. But 2 of the guys that own the bike shop at the racetrack and actually race R1s like this came over to chat, and they even showed me their race bikes, which was really cool. But it was actually productive because they offered to buy my track kit from me, which will help me make some of my money back, but we'll get to that a bit later. Most importantly, I asked for their opinion on why they think my bike is cutting out, and they suggested that it could be a fuel pump giving in or a fuel pump that's just clogged, which could make sense because it did sit for 5 months and fuel could go bad. So we'll have to open that up at some point when the bike is stripped. So the day wasn't without entertainment, but I'm still glad I did it. I learned more about the bike in a safe environment, and it's one hell of a bike even with my limited skills. The last bike I rode here was my 2013 R1 back in 2019, so it's been a while, and this generation is so much easier to ride. It's way narrower, and it feels like the front end gives you more feedback and is more reliable. This is also the first time I've had an auto blipper on track, and I have to say, I loved it. It allows you to focus that little bit extra on the corners rather than rev matching or repositioning your hand to pull a clutch in. If I came here every weekend for the next year, I'd get a lot faster. Obviously, I never want to crash a bike, but today would have been the best day since it's in full track getup. And I think I broke my bad luck streak at racetracks, because the last time I was on an asphalt circuit, my Aprilia's throttle cable snapped on the very first lap. And the very last time I was on a motocross track, I ended up in hospital. But most importantly, I did manage to break the lap record, just not the lap record of this track. But I'm going to count it anyway. So I'd be lying if I said I wasn't just a little bit tempted to just keep it as a track bike after that. But at $350 per set of tires, it's a bit expensive. And to be honest, I'd learn more and have more fun on a 600 in any case. But now it's time to strip it of all its track kit. To be honest, I am a little bit sad because it means this is the last time I'm going to see it like this, and it means I won't be able to ride it until it's completed. But at least I'll finally be making some progress.
It was first in need of a rinse because it's pretty dusty from sitting around and dirty from the track day. But because there are so many exposed connectors, I tried to avoid those areas. Back inside, I started with the tail, since I've had it off a few times already thanks to the dodgy battery. First, you remove 3 quick release bolts, which make it even faster, and that reveals 4 bolts underneath that bolt it to the subframe. Technically, there's a separate piece under the tail as well, but it's easier to just remove them as one piece. And then it was time to see what dirty secrets lay underneath the tank cover. The previous owner warned me that covers like these scratch the tank, and the guys at the track added that most people only run tank covers if they've crashed and dented the tank. So I think I got off pretty lightly. The paint was indeed scratched and wrinkled, but I've at least planned for it. Next, I removed the windscreen because I actually like it and want to keep it. Then the belly pan came off, this time without burning myself. Then the right-hand side fairing. However, the left-hand side was a bit more complicated because I also had to remove this hideous frame slider just to get the fairing off. Luckily, it's just one important bolt. Next was the last piece that makes it look like an R1, followed by the front mudguard, and finally rear mudguard that I don't want to keep because it's been spray painted and looks awful. Which meant I could turn my attention to the intake duct. This is a carbon fiber one because the stock one is actually a part of the headlight assembly, but I do love the shape of it. First, I had to remove the coolant reservoir that I'm sure is identical to the one on Top Rack's old R1, and then since this is also the bracket for the dash, I had to remove that too before I could unbolt the duct from the frame. I also made sure to remove the sticker on the swing arm, which I think officially makes it a bare bones R1, which looks pretty damn sexy if you ask me.
There's always something special about a stripped down bike. I mean, it's so easy to mistake it for Quartararo's M1 at a quick glance. Please don't argue with me, just let me have this one. But I think that was probably the easiest part of this transformation because I've already discovered more missing parts than in the first episode.
I went over all the parts I got for the road kit in these boxes in the last video, but there have been a few more findings since then, so let me update you.
The biggest one is that these fairings are not OEM. I know, I'm shocked too, but that does mean that I don't really want to bother getting them resprayed because what's the point? They're going to be crap no matter what. I also found out that there's a piece missing that goes in front of my oil cooler, and all the trim pieces are missing. So I'm currently trying to find a fairing solution. The rotating bar that clips into the rear seat and holds it down that's supposed to be mounted here is missing. It's not on the bike or in the boxes.
$12.
The same can be said about the switch on the front brake lever that activates the brake light.
$22.
I've also decided to replace the front brake caliper bolts because these have been drilled for safety wire. They still work perfectly fine, but new ones will just look better.
$27.
And then I already told you about the headlight assembly. Now, it turns out there are 3 main parts that I need to replace within this because they're either cracked or broken. The first one being this mainstay here that the mirrors mount to. You can see on the right hand side here, this piece is actually completely broken off. It's also what the dash mounts to here, and it's cracked there as well. Not to mention someone's already tried to glue it back together and it didn't go very well.
$50.
The second part is this giant plastic shroud here that sort of houses the DRLs, and it will actually stick out the side of the bike here when we're finished, so you will even be able to see a piece of it. But you can see it's cracked right above the intake here, so it's no good anymore.
$30.
And finally, if we spin this around, we need to replace the intake duct itself. Now this one is already not the stock one. You can see that it's carbon fiber, but it's cracked here and looks terrible. Now the problem with this piece is that you can't actually order just the duct itself from Yamaha. You have to order the entire assembly. So it comes with a diaphragm and the flapper and a whole bunch of nonsense that I don't actually want. A lot of people actually remove those to try and get more airflow. But that means that it costs more than I would like.
$335.
But on a brighter note, I might be able to get half my money back because I think I've sold the track kit and this carbon fiber intake duct to the guys that I met at the track for $250. And every little bit helps.
That means so far I've spent $476 on my cheap R1, ignoring the price of the R1, and ignoring the price of the tires, the oil, and the filter.
Because consumables don't really count, now do they? So I have already ordered all those parts that I just mentioned from Yamaha to try and get ahead. But of course there will still be plenty parts that I haven't even noticed that I'm missing yet. And the other bad news is that because I live at the bottom of the world, it's gonna take 3 weeks to get here from Japan.
Nevertheless, that's a good start. I got to have fun with it on track. We found some more issues to sort out, ordered some parts, and stripped the bike. I think now is also the perfect chance to give it a deep clean while it's naked. And then, hopefully soon, we can start putting stuff back on.
But anyway, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Let me know what color you would make the R1, and I'll see you on the next ride.